Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to plunge into another fascinating topic?
Always excited to dive in.
Today, we're tackling something big. Something really, really big. We're going deep into the world of philosophy.
Ah, yes. The mother of all disciplines. The OG thought experiment.
Love that description. And to help us navigate this vast ocean of ideas, we're using the metaphor of an iceberg.
Makes sense. There's so much to explore, from the familiar to the utterly mind-boggling.
Right. At the tip of the iceberg, we have those concepts many of us encounter in everyday life. Democracy, free speech, even are we living in a simulation question that's been making the rounds.
But as we descend deeper into this philosophical iceberg, things get more complex, more nuanced. We'll encounter ideas that challenge our assumptions, maybe even make us question the very nature of reality.
And that's what we're here for. So let's start by wading into those surface-level waters. First up, a classic philosophical showdown, rationalism versus empiricism. Where do you even begin to explain this one?
Imagine two different ways of building a house. Rationalism is like having a blueprint, a set of logical principles you use to construct your understanding. Reason and deduction, those are the cornerstones.
So it's like using your mind, your logic to figure things out.
Exactly. Descartes' famous "I think, therefore I am" is a prime example of this. You doubt your own existence. Well, to doubt is to think. And to think, you must exist.
Mind blown. But doesn't that discount our senses? What about experiencing the world firsthand?
That's where empiricism comes in. It's all about observation and experimentation. Let's go out there, explore, learn from what we see and experience.
Show me the evidence.
Exactly. If rationalism is the architect with the blueprint, empiricism is the builder getting their hands dirty, gathering materials and seeing what works.
So which approach do you lean towards? Team rationalism or team empiricism? Hit us with your take in the comments.
Always a fascinating debate. And while we're on the topic of mind-bending ideas, we can't forget solipsism.
Okay, now that's a word that screams philosophy lecture. Break it down for us, mere mortals.
Imagine for a moment that the only thing you can be absolutely certain of is the existence of your own mind.
Okay, I'm imagining it. But I'm not sure I like where this is going.
Solipsism takes skepticism to the extreme. What if everything else, the world, other people, are all just figments of your imagination?
That's giving me some serious Truman Show vibes. Makes you question everything. I've definitely had moments where I've felt like I'm living in a simulation.
It's a radical idea, for sure. But it makes you examine those assumptions we have about the world and how we know anything at all.
Deep stuff. And speaking of deep stuff, what about simulation theory? That one seems to be everywhere these days.
The idea that our reality might just be a super advanced computer program created by some other intelligence, yeah, it's gained a lot of traction.
Blame it on the Matrix. But even if we're not living in a simulation, the philosophical questions keep coming. Like Hume's fork, for example.
Hume's fork, a great way to categorize knowledge. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, argued that there are only two types of truth: relations of ideas and matters of fact.
So relations of ideas are those logical connections, those aha moments where something just makes sense.
Exactly. Like mathematical proofs. 2 + 2 will always equal 4.
No arguing with that.
Whereas matters of fact are those things we know from experience. The sun rises in the east because we've observed it happening.
Got it. So we're dividing knowledge into what we can figure out with our minds and what we learn through our senses. Makes sense to me. But how does this help us understand the world?
Hume argued that matters of fact can never be certain, only probable. We observe patterns, but we can't be 100% sure those patterns will always hold true.
So the sun might decide to rise in the west tomorrow, just to mess with us.
It's about the limits of our knowledge.
Yeah.
We use induction, the process of going from specific observations to general conclusions, but can we ever truly know cause and effect? Or are we just seeing patterns that could change at any moment?
Makes you think. And speaking of thinking, we have to revisit Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." Why is this idea such a cornerstone of philosophy?
It's an attempt to find certainty in a world of doubt. Even if we can doubt everything else, we can't doubt the fact that we're doubting. And if we're doubting, we must exist.
So simple, yet so profound. But is it really that unshakable? I mean, are there any arguments against it?
Of course, some argue that it proves the existence of a thinking self, but it doesn't tell us what that self actually is. Are we just minds, or do we have bodies too?
The mind-body problem. A classic philosophical conundrum. And it leads us nicely to property dualism.
The idea that the mind and body are made of different stuff, your brain, physical, your thoughts and feelings, mental properties arising from the brain.
So, like two overlapping circles in a Venn diagram.
That works, but the big question is, if they're so different, how do they interact? How does a non-physical thought cause a physical action?
Yeah, how does that work? It's a head-scratcher.
One that leads us to some even more thought-provoking territory like antinatalism.
Antinatalism. That sounds intense. Is this like a philosophy against having babies?
It's a philosophical stance on the ethics of having children. Antinatalists argue that bringing new life into a world filled with suffering is ethically problematic.
Wow. So it goes beyond personal preference.
Definitely. It raises questions about suffering, the value of life, our responsibilities to future generations.
Heavy stuff. What do you think, listeners? Is there a moral obligation to consider the potential for suffering when bringing new life into the world? Share your thoughts in the comments.
It's a complex issue, and as we go deeper into our iceberg of ideas, we encounter another perennial debate: determinism versus free will.
Are we really in control of our destinies, or are we just along for the ride?
Right. If everything is predetermined, do we actually have free will? Or is it just an illusion?
So are we responsible for our choices? Or are our actions just the inevitable outcome of a chain of events set in motion long ago? Let's hear it, listeners. Are you team determinism or team free will? Let us know.
It's a debate with no easy answers, but it makes us question our notions of morality, responsibility, and justice.
It really does. And just when I thought we couldn't go any deeper, we reach absurdism.
The philosophy that stares into the void and says, well, this is awkward, isn't it? Absurdism tackles the inherent meaninglessness of existence head on.
So if life has no inherent purpose, as some philosophers suggest, how do we find meaning in it?
Camus, in his Myth of Sisyphus, offers a compelling perspective. We may not reach some grand destination, but the act of striving, of rebelling against the meaninglessness, is where we find meaning.
It's like finding joy in the struggle itself.
Creating our own purpose in a world that doesn't inherently have one. What do you think, viewers? Does this resonate with you? What meaning do you create in your life? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
I love how philosophy takes these massive questions and throws them right back at us. It's not always about finding the right answer. It's about the journey, the exploration. And remember, we've only just scratched the surface of this philosophical iceberg.
There's so much more to uncover, so much more to ponder. Stay tuned as we dive even deeper into the mind-bending world of philosophical thought.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
And we're back, deep divers, ready to plunge even further into those philosophical depths. We've covered a lot of ground already, haven't we?
We really have. From doubting our own existence to wondering if we're living in a giant computer program, it's enough to make your head spin. But don't worry, we've got plenty more mind-bending concepts to explore.
That's right. And before we get lost in an existential crisis, let's talk about an ancient school of thought that offers some practical tools for navigating life's challenges. Stoicism.
Stoicism. Isn't that like, keeping a stiff upper lip and not showing your emotions?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Stoicism is about recognizing what you can and can't control. Focus your energy on what's within your power and accept what's beyond your control with grace and resilience.
So it's not about being emotionless. It's about mastering your emotions. Choosing how you respond to the inevitable ups and downs of life.
You got it. Stoicism teaches us to focus on virtue reason and living in accordance with nature. It's a practical philosophy that offers guidance on dealing with adversity, making ethical decisions, and finding meaning in everyday life.
I can see how these ideas would be super relevant today, especially with all the stress and uncertainty we face in the modern world. It's like a philosophy for turbulent times.
Exactly. Stoicism encourages us to find inner peace amidst the chaos. Focus on what we can control: our thoughts, our actions, our responses to external events.
Taking responsibility for your inner state no matter what's happening around you, that's a powerful idea. And it makes me think of something we touched on earlier, democracy. Is there a Stoic approach to politics, or is that a whole other philosophical can of worms?
Well, Plato wasn't exactly a fan of democracy. He argued that not everyone is fit to rule. He believed that society should be governed by philosopher kings, those with wisdom, reason, and a deep understanding of justice.
So instead of electing leaders based on popularity or charisma, Plato thought we should be looking for leaders who are virtuous, knowledgeable, and dedicated to the common good.
Yes. He believed that ruling should be entrusted to those with the intellectual and moral capacity to make wise decisions for the benefit of all. It's a pretty radical idea, but it makes you think about the qualities we should look for in our leaders.
It definitely challenges the idea that anyone can be a leader just by winning an election. Maybe we need a philosophy test for politicians. What do you think, viewers? Is wisdom and virtue more important than popularity when it comes to leadership? Let us know down in those comments.
That's a great question. And while we're on the topic of virtue, let's shift gears a bit and talk about virtue ethics. This branch of philosophy focuses on character rather than rules. How can we cultivate virtues like courage, honesty, and wisdom in our own lives?
So it's less about following a strict set of rules and more about becoming a good person, developing those qualities that make us trustworthy, compassionate, and resilient.
Precisely. Virtue ethics emphasizes the importance of developing good habits, making ethical choices, and striving to be the best version of ourselves. It's not about achieving moral perfection, but engaging in a lifelong process of self-improvement.
It's like leveling up your character in a video game, but for real life. Making choices that strengthen your character and help you navigate life's challenges with integrity and wisdom.
And speaking of navigating life's complexities, we can't forget about a philosophical perspective that offers a very different lens through which to view the world: Marxism.
Marxism, the philosophy that critiques capitalism and advocates for a more equitable distribution of wealth.
That's right. Marxism focuses on how economic systems shape society and how power dynamics play out in the realm of material conditions. It's a critique of social inequality and a call for economic justice.
It's about understanding the role of class struggle, the tension between those who own the means of production and those who labor, and how this dynamic influences everything from politics to culture.
And it challenges us to consider how economic structures can perpetuate inequality and to imagine alternative systems that prioritize the well-being of all members of society, not just the privileged few.
It's a perspective that continues to spark debate and inspire social change movements around the world. What are your thoughts on this one? Is economic equality a prerequisite for a just society? Let's continue the conversation down in the comments.
Now, to shift gears once again, let's explore a classic philosophical tug-of-war: optimism versus pessimism.
The age-old question, is the glass half full or half empty?
Exactly. Optimism, as envisioned by Leibniz, sees the world as the best of all possible worlds. It's about focusing on the good, the potential for progress, and the belief that things will ultimately work out for the best.
So optimists are the folks who see the silver lining in every cloud, the ones who believe that challenges are opportunities for growth.
Right. While pessimism, as championed by Schopenhauer, views suffering as inherent to existence, it acknowledges the harsh realities of life, the inevitability of pain and loss, and the limitations of human happiness.
So pessimists are the ones who are always prepared for the worst, those who see the world through a more cynical lens.
Well, it's not necessarily about being cynical. It's more about recognizing the inherent limitations of human existence and the prevalence of suffering in the world.
These two perspectives offer drastically different ways of looking at the world, don't they? It affects how we interpret events, make decisions, and approach life's challenges. It's amazing how our philosophical outlook can shape our entire experience of reality. What about you? Are you more of an optimist or a pessimist? Or maybe somewhere in between. Let us know your perspective in the comments.
As we venture deeper into the depths of our philosophical iceberg, we're going to encounter ideas that challenge traditional categories and push the boundaries of what we thought we knew. So buckle up, things are about to get even more interesting.
Welcome back, deep divers. We've been on quite a philosophical journey, haven't we? From the familiar shores of everyday thought to some pretty deep waters. But hold on tight, because we're about to navigate the most treacherous currents of all.
That's right. We're heading into the depths of our philosophical iceberg, where the ideas become more abstract, more challenging. But don't worry, that's where the real treasures lie.
I'm all about those hidden treasures.
Yeah.
So what mind-bending concepts await us in these uncharted waters?
Well, first, we need to address a major dividing line in the world of philosophy: the continental analytic split.
Ooh, a philosophical rivalry. Are we talking about dueling schools of thought with secret societies and philosophical fight clubs?
Haha, not quite that dramatic.
Yeah.
But there are two distinct approaches to philosophical inquiry. Continental philosophy, with its roots in thinkers like Hegel, Nietzsche, and Sartre, tends to grapple with those big existential questions about existence, meaning, history, the very nature of reality.
So these are the philosophers who wrestle with the human condition in all its messy glory.
Exactly. They explore how our experiences, culture, and history shape our understanding of the world. On the other hand, we have analytic philosophy, which emerged in the early 20th century with a focus on logic, language, and rigorous argumentation.
So if continental philosophers are like poets, grappling with the grand mysteries of life, analytic philosophers are more like scientists, breaking things down, analyzing the pieces.
A great analogy. Think of figures like Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein, who were instrumental in shaping this approach. Clarity, precision, and using the tools of logic to solve philosophical problems, that's their game.
So less about grand narratives and more about dissecting arguments, finding inconsistencies, building logically sound frameworks.
You got it. And of course, both approaches have their strengths, their limitations. It's a bit like comparing apples and oranges, both fruits, but offering very different tastes and textures.
It makes you wonder, did these two camps ever actually talk to each other? Or are they forever locked in a philosophical standoff?
There's been a lot of debate, disagreement over the years, for sure. But more recently, there's been a growing movement to bridge the gap, to recognize that these approaches can actually complement and enrich each other.
It's like realizing that apples and oranges can make a pretty tasty fruit salad. It's all about balance.
And speaking of different perspectives, we can't leave out a philosophical movement that's had a huge impact on art, literature, and culture.
Existentialism.
Existentialism. The philosophy that embraces angst, confronts the meaninglessness of it all, and asks, what is the meaning of life? Even when the answer might be, you tell me.
You've got it. Existentialism recognizes the freedom, the responsibility of the individual in creating meaning in a world that doesn't inherently have any. It acknowledges that we're thrown into existence without a choice, facing a universe that's indifferent to our hopes and dreams.
Sounds a bit bleak. But is there any hope in this existential abyss?
Of course. Existentialism isn't about despair. It's about embracing our freedom to choose who we are, what we value, creating our own meaning in a seemingly meaningless world.
So taking ownership, right? We're the authors of our own stories, even if we didn't get to pick the setting or the first few chapters. Precisely. Think of figures like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who emphasized authenticity, individual choice, and taking responsibility for our actions. What do you think, listeners? Does this idea resonate with you? Do you feel that sense of freedom and responsibility in creating your own purpose? Let us know down in the comments.
Always love hearing your thoughts. And while we're on this existential train of thought, let's talk about a concept introduced by Martin Heidegger, thrownness.
Thrownness sounds a bit like a bad carnival ride.
Right. What's the philosophical meaning behind this term?
Heidegger used this term to describe the feeling of being, well, thrown into existence without our consent. We don't choose to be born. We don't get to pick the circumstances of our birth. And yet, here we are, facing all the complexities and challenges of life.
Like suddenly finding yourself on stage in the middle of a play you didn't audition for, with no script and no clue what your lines are.
Exactly. It's that disorientation, that feeling of being thrust into a world we don't fully understand, with limited control over what happens to us.
A bit unsettling, to say the least, to realize we're just kind of, well, dropped into existence without a clear purpose or direction.
But it also speaks to our freedom. If we're not bound by a predetermined plan, we have the power to forge our own path, create our own meaning.
Freedom and anxiety all rolled into one philosophical package. Now let's tackle a pair of concepts that often leave people scratching their heads: structuralism and post-structuralism.
You could say that. They believe that by understanding these structures, we can gain a deeper understanding of how meaning is created, how our minds work.
Okay, I'm following so far. But what about post-structuralism? Is that like structuralism 2.0?
Not exactly. Post-structuralism challenges the idea that there are stable, fixed meanings. It emphasizes the fluidity, the instability of language, the way meanings are constantly shifting, being renegotiated.
So if structuralism is about finding the order, the patterns, post-structuralism is about embracing the ambiguity, the slipperiness of meaning.
Precisely. Think of figures like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, who argued that language isn't just a neutral tool. It's a force that shapes our understanding, influences power dynamics.
So the words we use don't just describe the world, they actually help create the world we perceive. It's mind-bending, but also incredibly powerful.
It forces us to question those assumptions we have about how meaning is made, to recognize the role language plays in shaping our thoughts, beliefs, even our social structures.
Okay, we're officially in the deep end now.
Yeah.
But bring it on. What other mind-blowing concepts are lurking in these philosophical depths?
Well, let's talk about a concept that's influenced not just philosophy, but psychology, literature, art, Freud's ideas about the pleasure principle and the death drive.
Ah, Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. I remember encountering his theories back in psychology class. But what's the connection to philosophy?
Freud argued that much of human behavior is driven by these unconscious desires and motivations. The pleasure principle, for example, is our innate drive to seek pleasure, avoid pain, to satisfy our needs, our desires.
Okay, that one's pretty straightforward. I think we can all relate to that. But the death drive, that sounds a bit ominous. Is he suggesting we all have a subconscious desire to self-destruct?
It's a complex and controversial concept for sure. The death drive, sometimes called thanatos, represents this drive toward aggression, destruction, ultimately even a return to an inorganic state. It's this force that opposes eros, the life instinct focused on creation, connection, and survival.
So there's this constant tension between our desire to live, thrive, and this more primal urge towards dissolution.
Exactly. Freud believed this tension lies at the very core of the human psyche, driving our behaviors, shaping our experiences in ways we often don't even realize.
It's a reminder that we're complex creatures, driven by both conscious and unconscious forces, constantly navigating this interplay of life and death instincts. Pretty intense stuff. Speaking of forces that shape our lives, let's explore a concept developed by Michel Foucault, the disciplinary society.
Disciplinary society. Does that mean we're all living in some giant philosophical school, constantly being graded on our behavior?
Uh-huh. I was thinking the same thing. So what did Foucault actually mean by this?
Foucault is fascinated by how power operates in modern societies, how institutions like schools, prisons, hospitals, with their systems of surveillance and control, create these docile bodies that conform to societal norms.
So it's not just about physical confinement, it's about internalizing these rules, expectations, becoming self-disciplining subjects who basically police our own behavior.
You got it. Foucault argued that this disciplinary power is everywhere. It extends beyond those physical institutions, shaping our thoughts, desires, even our sense of self.
It makes you think about all those ways we conform to social expectations, often without even realizing it. The pressure to fit in, to succeed, to live up to certain standards, those are all forms of disciplinary power, shaping our behavior, limiting our choices.
And these ideas are even more relevant today in our digital age. With technology, surveillance, data collection, are we becoming even more disciplined, more controlled in this world where our every move can be tracked, monitored? It's something to think about.
Makes you want to unplug and run for the hills. But knowledge is power, right? The more we're aware of these subtle forces, the better equipped we are to navigate them.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating complex landscapes, let's delve into a concept proposed by Jean Baudrillard, hyperreality.
Hyperreality. Now that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. What's the meaning behind this futuristic-sounding term?
Baudrillard argued that in our postmodern world, those lines between reality and simulation have blurred. The media, technology, consumer culture all contribute to this hyperreality, this world of images and representations that often seem more real than real.
It's like we're living in a world of carefully constructed illusions, bombarded with images, information that shape our perceptions, make it hard to distinguish the genuine from the artificial.
Think of things like reality TV, social media, even those elaborately themed environments like Disneyland, all designed to create these simulated experiences that feel more exciting, more fulfilling than everyday life.
It makes you wonder, in this world saturated with images and simulations, what happens to our sense of reality? Do we lose touch with the authentic, the genuine, the real? It's a question worth pondering, and I think it's a perfect place to wrap up our exploration of philosophy for today.
We've covered so much ground, haven't we? From the tip of the iceberg to its most mind-bending depths.
We really have. It's been an incredible journey, exploring ideas that challenge our assumptions, broaden our perspectives, and encourage us to think differently about ourselves and the world. And to all of our amazing viewers, thank you for joining us on this philosophical adventure. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of ideas. If you did, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. We love hearing from you.
And remember, philosophy isn't just some dusty old subject confined to textbooks and classrooms. It's a way of life, a constant process of questioning, exploring, grappling with those big questions that have captivated humanity for centuries. So, keep those philosophical wheels turning, and who knows what fascinating insights you might uncover.
Until next time, keep diving deep.